Good evening, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm good, doctor. How are you?
Very good. Yeah. Well, I was fortunate to meet you in person, so I really appreciate what you are doing. I mean, you definitely, in a way, put yourself out, and uh, and you have been kind of facing a lot of harassment and attack because what you did. So, uh, what kind of school is Grace Church? Is that
Grace
private
Church,
or public?
yes, it's a private school.
Mhm.
It's one of, I would say, maybe a dozen or a couple dozen of the higher tier. They're called elite schools in the Manhattan area of New York,
Okay.
and they charge, I think, up to 55,000, something like that, per year,
Wow. Just for tuition alone?
just for tuition.
Wow.
There is substantial financial aid for some students.
Okay.
Um, and I think they have some of the highest amounts of financial aid of all the elite privates in New York. But it's definitely an interesting place to work. I don't really come from that world myself. I mean, I moved to New York 20 years ago, and I hadn't worked in a private school until 2012
Okay.
when I
So,
started there.
oh wow. So you changed your career, right?
I did. I was a computer programmer.
Oh,
I did web design, and I held a number of odd jobs in my 20s
hmm.
before that. So I really only started to get into teaching in my 40s.
Okay. Well,
And sort of like you, I imagine.
right.
We
Yeah,
kind of had a similar path.
exactly. I was an engineer for about I worked as an engineer for 20 years. And then in 2011, I kind of became a math teacher at a private Christian college prep school. Uh,
Hmm.
so well, back then I haven't experienced all those like CRT and SEL things, but what concerned me uh, is that we inflate grades so much that become meaningless. Uh,
Hmm.
since you and I kind of jump in, right? Kind of like we didn't see we didn't see things gradually change, not like our colleagues. They've been there for years, so they see gradual change. I mean, you and I just basically jump in and say, oh, this is quite different from what when we went to school.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Um, I
So go ahead.
no, yeah, I noticed that too. And I mean, I taught for 10 years before I lost my job. So, I mean, even over the course of those 10 years, I was noticing I kind of had to rearrange my materials and kind of, give things that were less challenging, cover less material, um, because there was just seemed to be uh, just so many other things that are sort of interfering with the uh, academic success that I felt like definitely felt pressure to do that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
when do you start to experience with this anti-racism training and all that?
Well, it was from the beginning. Grace Church School has always been fairly progressive in
Okay.
its ideology. It's an Episcopal school.
Mhm.
It comes from that tradition. I guess it would say it's not really Episcopal anymore. Uh, but Episcopals have always been very progressive,
Okay.
politically, I suppose. I use that progressive in quotes a little bit because I don't think it's very progressive, but that's what they
Mm,
like to call themselves.
right.
And in the tradition of that, um, the school, which has a 100-year tradition of being a kindergarten through 8th grade school, it had been
Mm,
that way since over 100 years. They decided to open up a high school, so 9 through 12, starting in 2012, and that's when I
okay.
joined the faculty. And from the beginning, the way they developed the business plan was that the colleges were looking for more globally minded citizens. This is a little bit of a progressive speak here, but
Okay.
students that were, I guess what I called it was woke weaned. So they were prepared to adopt the ideologies of college that they were pushing in college. There was sort of like training wheels. So they would already be progressive. They would already have certain ideologies around community or diversity,
Right.
inclusion, all these different concepts they would be well versed in.
Okay.
So when they got to college, they would be the colleges were looking for those kids, right? They're looking for kids that aren't going to challenge those ideas, I think.
Yeah. So
So
in
they
a
were
way,
they were selling, they're essentially, it's a product that they're selling.
okay. So in a
Yeah.
way, the kids will have already indoctrinated before they get into college.
Right, exactly.
Mm.
So, and that's a feature that the school is saying, listen, we are going to be packaging our applications through the college office with this particular view, and we're going to have this reputation as that kind of school.
Okay.
So that's going to help us essentially get our kids to matriculate at
Okay.
these top colleges where they're pushing this now.
So I was assuming those colleges are elite colleges, right?
You know what? Yes, that was the idea. It's not clear that it's working out the way they thought. But yes, they are, among the top colleges. Parents who send their children to this school are expecting that. They're expecting that their children go to these places. Competition has become fierce.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always based around excellence or achievement.
Right.
So I think many parents are surprised that that their children aren't getting in where they expected them to.
Right. Yeah. And this is what in a way, we see that it's actually started in the college, and that got pushed down towards the high schools, and then pushed later on down to kindergarten level. So like, the CRT started in, I think, 1989, as was coined at that time. And then critical pedagogy, which is application of CRT, if I remember right, is 1995, some kind of time frame. Like
yeah, what is that? Gloria and Ladson Billings?
Right.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was around that. And then you had all the various add-ons like culturally responsive education.
Right.
You have whiteness studies and all these other things.
Yeah, and that pretty quickly actually was become the ideology for at least for the teaching colleges or schools of education. And you talk about in your article at Substack, Barry Weiss Substack. So you're talking about well, you are being kind of instructed, right, to treat the student differently based on their race. So how different treatment you can give to a student?
It's interesting there. Yeah, it plays out in different ways, right? So let's say I was also the curriculum coordinator for the department, which is our way of calling the department head.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have to make choices about who is going to be put in an honors course. You might have to make choices about, whether to pass someone if they get below a certain grade. You might have to anticipate certain issues, right? So the idea was that the students of color, you have to kind of make assumptions about what they can handle. And it is a kind of, I think George Bush, the first George Bush coined this term, or maybe this like the poverty of low expectations.
Okay.
Some of that really plays out But what's happening is it's not contained specifically to that population anymore. It's now gone into everyone. So, you know, what starts there now sort of bleeds out to all a general way of looking at pathologizing students and making assumptions about what they can do and can't do in the way that they're instructed. So, for example, like this idea that stress is toxic to the body, for example. So like if you are under stress, whether that's in a racialized context where you have a student who identifies as Black or is socially dealing with that, that's seen as a form of work that student is constantly doing. So if I were to impose, say, homework, have everyone, you know, do homework, I never actually gave different groups different amounts of homework, but the idea is that if you make an assumption about how much stress someone is under, then since we do teach students differently based on their abilities and their needs, well, then you might, you know, be in a situation where, depending on the context, you know, you would give someone a break because they're under this situation. And it was never quantified. It was never really set in stone, but it was always there. It was always in the air. When I did try to apply universal standards, it was seen as a kind of traditional way of teaching, and of course, traditional is a pejorative word.
Right.
Traditional, if you say that someone is traditionally, usually what's going to come after that is something bad, which, you know, that came up a fair amount.
Okay. What, in a way, what I mean, when you apply universal standard, that was viewed as part of the white supremacy, right? By those people, the CRT theorists.
Yes, in fact, it masked it. Their view was that to apply equal standards to a situation which reflects structural racism is a form of denial. So that's why, in their view, you have to give different. You have to give some people a leg up and some people. Now, I understand the impulse to welfare. That I think we do need a social safety net in this country, but it should be done on the individual, not their group membership, or certainly not their racial membership.
Yeah, and also to having a social safety net is just to catch them, but not just keep them there, right?
Yes.
And that's how, unfortunately, that's our welfare system has done to many people in that, you know, down there. So you talk about the training, like anti-racism training, that you are segregated, I mean, the white teachers and white students. When is that? What year is that?
Right. So there had been those types of groupings in the past. So from the first years I taught there was a consultant called the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They're essentially a very radical DEI. They've been around for a long time too. They're one of the older ones.
Okay.
And, you know, they would put us in groups. They put us in white, you know, we would assemble in a room for 2 days, and they would separate the white people. First, we were all together, and then they would say, okay, now only the white people, now the people of color.
Wow.
And, you know, they would ask the white people certain questions, and they asked the people of color certain questions. The whole point is to try for you to accept your racialized identity as salient, as important.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the things that some of the trainers have said that I've heard them say is that they're very, very sad and disappointed when their Black students graduate without understanding their Blackness and how important it is. Okay. And when students, or teachers for that matter, don't accept how significant their racial identity is. Of course, it's all based on the assumption that this is a hopelessly racist society. Well, then they failed. They failed if you don't introject your racial identity to a very strong degree.
Okay.
Whether you're proud of it or you feel responsible for it, or you accept your privilege or your oppressive status or all that stuff, that's seen as a failure. And so they will say they have separated. They have affinity groups as well, which are optional, but they are strongly encouraged that the white students go to their white affinity group where they learn about their own privilege and what they can do to, act from that privilege to make a better society.
Okay. So in a way,
and so on.
Yeah. So in a way, become allies, right?
Right.
To the
Ally,
oppressed.
an allyship was not enough. So they had to invent even more extreme words, which I'm sure you know, things like the accomplice and it's if you want to be a really good ally, then you become an accomplice. And if you're a really good accomplice, you become a co-conspirator. So these terms are very, they're based around metaphors of war and crime.
Okay.
Because since we have a criminal society, in their view, if you are truly an advocate for social justice, well then, since the laws are corrupt, then being a criminal is good.
Oh, okay.
So they've inverted the value system, right? So
Right.
now if you're an accomplice, you're a co-conspirator, you're actually a good thing.
And that's basically Marxism.
Is it? Yeah, I mean, it seems like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you lived it, so
right.
I'm amazed at what you went through and what I've been learning about it. I do feel like this is this is what's happening here in this country. And I looked into the history of affinity groups too. Affinity sounds like a nice word. It sounds like everyone's going to get together and we're going to share things we have in common. It came out of the Spanish Civil War, the communists in the Spanish Civil War, and it moved to this country during the 60s.
Okay.
And it was employed domestically by groups, extreme left groups like SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, and the Weathermen, who were terrorists.
Yeah,
I mean, they blew up buildings and they killed. So I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
And in a way, it's no wonder that you see those vocabularies, because those people who are the leaders, like for example, Bill Ayers, I think, and he actually became a professor, and his specialty is early child education. So a lot of 60s radicals actually went into education in higher, went to like school education in higher education in colleges and universities. So I guess it's no wonder we see those vocabularies which was introduced in the 60s. And also when I was reading your experience, that just reminded me of Cultural Revolution, which I went through. Like, for example, you are being basically publicly humiliated because you dare to challenge their, what they are trying to sell, right?
Yes, and the way they do it, I don't know what it was like during the Cultural Revolution, but the way they do it in my school is they will claim that my views are harmful. So when I expressed my doubts, when I publicly, challenged some of these ideas, they didn't say, you are wrong and we're telling you what to think. What they would say is, we're not telling you what to think and say, but we're telling you that you have harmed these groups, and therefore the community, which we speak for the community, the administration says, we need to come back together as a community. So it's always this sense of the collective, which they administer. of course.
Wow.
So they get to speak for the collective
Right.
because
And
they are administering it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I get, and what you did actually, which is really reasonable, right? You are not really like opposing to what they're trying to say. You are just challenging. You are kind of bring a different point of view, right?
Mm.
And even for that, uh, uh, it's not tolerated. You have to, I mean, you talk about experience that every class, the teachers has basically to, is that read aloud about,
Yes, yes, the statement
yeah,
about what I had done during the public meeting, asking questions about what the facilitator was saying about
right.
white supremacy being in individualism, objectivity, all these things. So they read the statement. In fact, every teacher had to read it to their advisory group, which every teacher, almost every teacher has an advisory group,
Mm-hmm.
and every student is in an advisory. I had my own advisory group
Okay.
too. But at the same time, 10:30 on a Wednesday, everyone had to read this statement, which was prepared by the head of school, the whole
Wow.
school,
Do
where they said, they didn't give me by name, but everyone knew who I was. They said,
okay.
last week a teacher
Oh,
challenged, our cherished beliefs, and we recommit to um, undoing racism. They said they're going to undo racism.
okay.
Uh, and they said, they're going to put a letter in my file. They put a letter in my
Right, right,
file. That's
right.
how they say it. So,
Which is
um,
basically during the Cultural Revolution, everyone have a dossier. So
mm,
everything you said, everything you've done is put on your file. And that basically, uh, that when you go to different place or find different job, and that dossier actually go with you. So you have a
mhm,
record there. Wow. So basically you have that kind of record,
oh yeah,
the school put on there. And also you have to go through some kind of, well, during the Cultural Revolution, that's called re-education. But now they say it's different, right? Restorative justice or something. You have to go through that.
yes, restorative justice. They said if I wanted to continue teaching, I would have to do this restorative justice session.
Okay.
So it would have involved me
Mm-hmm.
as well as the students that they claimed I had harmed. Some of the students
Okay.
I had claimed I had harmed, and the Office of Community Engagement, which is the sort of internal DEI
Okay, right.
unit, would lead the session.
Yeah.
And I asked them, well, I'm not going to sign a contract if I don't know what it is
Right,
exactly.
right,
What
right,
is the
right, right.
process? Please tell me the details and I'll consider it. But they didn't tell me the details. They
Oh,
said you
wow.
just have to sign it and agree to it. And I
Wow.
didn't sign the contract. I chose not to sign the contract.
Mhm.
It's funny because I even reached out to some students of color in my classes. We'd had a fine relationship up to that point, but after I spoke out, many of the other teachers were using me as an object lesson for things like white fragility,
Oh, wow.
and they were essentially teaching the students um, that I was bad
Right, right,
and
right.
why I was not enlightened or
Right,
whatever.
right, right. Yeah. And then
Um,
that's quite typical in the Cultural Revolution. They will set someone up as example. So
mm,
basically, it's a bad example, so people can learn from that. So
mhm.
basically, in a way, is uh, if you want to avoid, harassment or imprisonment, here is example. Don't be like that.
Yes, exactly. I was a bad example. And,
Right.
of course, they're also very forgiving, right? So they'll say, we understand that people make mistakes.
Okay.
And, if we'd like to talk to you about what happened, and we'd like to hear from you. And I did that. But when I gave my point of view, which was actually I was pleased with what happened, because when I started to challenge those ideas, other students started to challenge
Right.
and other teachers started to challenge. And they were expecting me to be sorry. They're expecting me to bow my head
Right.
and
You
say that I'm contrite. And there was a certain point in the meeting, which lasted like 2.5 hours,
wow.
where I said, where they, I basically said, listen, I'm not sorry. I'm glad.
Right.
And at that point, the whole meeting shifted and they sort of gave up on me, and they
Right.
started to tell me how horrible it was what I did, because they clearly, I did not have shame
Right.
anymore. I mean, I used
Wow.
to, right? I used to have it.
Okay.
And I think they felt like, oh, we'll just talk, we'll tell Paul that he's,
Right.
he's done a bad thing and then he'll
Right.
come around. And,
Okay.
but I was not sorry, and I wasn't going to say I was.
Right.
So when I wasn't, they would say, well, you caused grievous harm to these students
Wow.
by challenging by making them feel that you did not acknowledge their blackness or their racial identity. And I myself had questioned my own racial identity. And this was the greatest sin. This was the thing, because this whole thing runs on identity. If you challenge their idea of your identity, well, then you're an apostate. You are a heretic. You have to be re-educated.
Right.
And so, I was like, but the question I had asked in the meeting was, why must I identify with a race based simply on how other people see me, which is their idea of a social construction of race? So if society constructs a race where they think that you're white, well, then to what extent must I internalize society's views of me? And the answer to that is 100%. That is the answer.
Oh, wow.
And when I simply challenge whether, to what degree, not do I or don't I, but we all do have to a little bit, but to what degree? That's a subtle question. That is not a yes or no question. That is a far more dangerous question. Because when you ask the question of degree, then it's like, well, you're making them seem like the total ideologues that they are. So some of the kids started to say, well, I don't always feel this way. I don't, why do I have to do? And that was a very good question. That was a very dangerous question. And so that's why they wanted me to repent. But what they'll do is they'll say, what they did is that they said, you've harmed the students, you've harmed their ancestors, you've harmed their families, you've harmed they went, you've caused disruption in their minds and systems. And my view was, okay, if you can't have a free discussion about things, well, then you haven't taught anybody anything.
No.
You haven't taught anybody anything. You just taught people to blah, 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 and say all the things. And, their view was, no, in fact, I was wrong, because I had scared the students. I had made them, I had closed their minds in their view. Like since I had created fear in the community, then I had not given them an opportunity to question. So their idea is like, everyone must, only when everyone agrees on the premises can people relax and then start to open, and they will control and they will determine who's afraid. And like they just have such a stranglehold on the psychological, on the way they represent the psychology of students. Now, I agree that there were probably students that were upset by what I did, 100%. There were also students that were excited by what I said, that felt liberated by the questions I asked, and they asked their own questions, and that's the way it should be, right? That's the way it should. But no, what they were really afraid of wasn't the harm to the students at all. It was the harm to the ideas.
Exactly.
Clearly they had ideas,
right,
and they didn't want those ideas challenged. And and this is how it goes. It's a private school, it's a private business. People want to believe certain things as a prerequisite for going there, fine. Right? But I had reached the limit of my patience around that stuff.
And also the vocabulary, which also remind me of cultural revolution. One of that is saying that in a way you you harm the greater good or the higher truth, just because you're challenging their worldview. So,
yes, the higher truth.
Right.
That's such a, geometrically, like this idea that it was it was really eye-opening when I heard that, because
Right.
it made sense. Like, they have their own God. This
Hmm.
is their God, right?
Right.
So the God is always the vertical,
Hmm.
this projection. The greater good and the higher truth is something external to the self in their view, and it's a substitute for God.
Right.
And to me, God is in self, or
Right.
God is inside.
Right.
So you have a conscience, you
Right. Right.
reflect, and it emerges, and that's your contribution.
Right. Right. Right.
And then you leave it up to God how things shake out, right? You
Yeah.
just, that's I would never presume to know the greater good or the higher truth. That's just ridiculous.
Right.
Right? How could I possibly know that?
Right. Well, have they actually spelled out, like, what do they mean by that? What do you mean by the higher truth?
Yeah. And I got really curious when I heard that. And I went to the Office of Community Engagement and I
Yeah.
asked them, and I got into a great discussion with a very, very patient woman who
Okay.
is the director there. And, um, it is this idea that everyone will be at peace. Everyone will have everything they need. It is essentially a utopia. It's a social justice utopia.
Right. Which is a
And
communist, which is
it's a communism.
communism. It's
And I said,
communist utopia.
I said, okay, so are you just saying like people are just going to give each other what they need? She said, yes, people just of their own volition, they will give. Like if you walk by a person on the street who
Right.
has
Right.
less than you give him, half your cloak or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
That's this idea. And it's the idea you build a society on this impulse. But of course, until people are at such a place where they will do this of their own free will, there will be people who will manage it and tell you how to do it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
Definitely.
that's where they come in.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
where they get paid to do. So I said, well, and she said, well, yes, she kind of embarrassed. She admitted, she was like, yes, we believe in equal outcome. We believe in
Oh,
equality of outcome.
wow.
She said it. And I was like, okay, great. Like, I'm so glad you said that,
Right.
because at least you're not hiding it. But it took
Right.
about an hour to get it out of her. And then I said, well, what about, who's going to make the stuff? Like, who's going to do the laundry? Who's going to grow the crops? And,
Right.
there was this, so, well, it will be, maybe robots, so who's going to make the robots? We are literally dealing with people that just, they don't have any idea. They have a vision, they have a dream,
Right.
and they will tinker to create the dream. And that means that they're going to push down on some people, they're going to bring up other people. They're social engineers,
Right.
which are like bureaucrats essentially. And that's what they do. And they're operating from that impulse. And if some people, who have too much power need to be stepped on,
Mm-hmm.
and things are just given away to other people who have
Right.
less
Right.
power.
Right.
Well,
Right.
that's all part of doing the work, right? Doing the
Wow.
work.
Wow.
So, and I realized, like, what I saw in her and in this whole system and the vision
Mm-hmm.
is of a humanity which is completely tame, which is all of the passion, all of the impossible to control. All those things have been bred out of the individual, where they just are like vegetation.
Right.
So that I had this idea that they just want people to be like plants.
Right. Right.
If
Right.
you could just be like a plant,
Mm-hmm.
and just do, you're not going to do anything that's going to make anyone uncomfortable, then everything will be fine.
Right.
Right. And then, they'll be like the people just watering the plants. Right. But until we get to that point, we're going to have to make things uncomfortable. Right.
Yeah.
We're going to have to make them uncomfortable in the right way, because what we have now is a very, very bad society.
Right.
And so we're going to
Exactly.
fix society.
Yeah. And
Right.
which basically is one of in a way, one of the assumptions of communism is that the current society is not good. The current system is
Yes.
bad, so we have to, in a way, destroy it or deconstruct it, and then out of the ruins we'll have this wonderful new heaven and earth. Of
Yes.
course,
Yeah.
of course, their new heaven new heaven and earth, there was no God there. It's like somehow
No,
there,
history is God.
yeah, somehow something
Yeah.
comes up. And another thing I find that is kind of um, in a way kind of send chill down my spine is the teachers are encouraged to flag students who are
Mhm.
who just appear to be resistant to this ideology.
When I got that email, when that email, like I looked at that email, I was like, we have moved. I gave me chills too. Like I saw it and I had a reaction that was visceral. Like my stomach just dropped
Wow.
because I read this. I was reading this email, which I saved, by the way. I have it all.
Mm.
Where this woman was saying, they had created this new program called Community and Diversity, where the first part of the course in 9th grade is to teach the kids that their identity,
Okay.
how to think intersectionally,
Right.
where your identity is salient and you have multiple intersecting identities, but
Right.
essentially like the big ones are race and gender
Mm.
and ethnicity. And, these determine, these are the most important things about you, not your, character, honesty, choices, sense of humor, personality, all of those things. And so, there are students that are resistant to this, right? And I know it because I had them in advisory. I was an advisor in 9th grade. And I was thinking about my own advisees that were, I had also been instructed to teach these kinds of ideas. And I was doing it kind of, but trying to throw in curveballs here and there to like wake them up a little bit. But, it was breaking my heart because I saw my advisees going along with it because they trusted the adults. They thought they knew best. They had their doubts, but they were saying the right things because they wanted to fit in.
Right.
And this email comes across the email that says, we're noticing that some students are not, are resistant to these ideas, what we're trying to teach them.
Right.
And, of course, the greater good and the higher truth. And, what would you think about flagging some of these students for conversations with the dean? And I just asked a question on the email chain. I was like, well, what do you mean by resistant? What does that mean? And someone else wrote back to, everyone thought it was a great idea. The first thing everyone thought was a great idea. Like 10 people are like, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's flag the students.
Wow.
And I was just like, what do you mean by resistant? And then someone came in on the email thread and said, well, like generally saying things like, why can't we all get along? Being colorblind. These are bad things.
Wow.
And I was just like, we've gone off the rail. I mean, I know I looked into, I know all of the justifications and the reasons why they say color blindness is bad and yada, yada. So I wrote back a pretty substantial email telling people on the chain what I really thought of this. And I got back something else from another colleague, and we went back and forth a little bit. And she basically said, well, listen, we don't pretend to be colorblind, right? We notice the difference between, a Spanish rose and a French rose, right? Or I don't know. And I was like, well, yeah, because those are different species. We're not different species. Hello. But I was like, this is not, I'm not going to convince anyone. So I just kind of stopped. But the whole exchange was fascinating. And I remember just reading it over and over, just trying to imbibe it and just soak it up, because this was so much of the essence of the problem is revealed in these types of work interactions. I know so many people at work now and schools and just in their daily jobs are experiencing these types of things. And, it's like when the needle on the record scratches and you just get pulled out of yourself and you realize that you are in a place that is operating according to some set of rules which are deranged and demented. And, that's a difficult place to be. So I had a couple, I know I've met teachers since I left that have put up with this for years and had a much worse time than I did. I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
my rough period was, a couple of months.
Okay.
But I had been struggling with this for years, for,
Mm,
2017 or 2018 or so, when it started to get
wow.
really bad. But I'm encouraged, like I'm encouraged by what happened, because I saw parents came to talk to me, students came to talk to me,
Okay.
teachers came to talk to me. Like, people knew this was wrong. I
That's
think
good.
they know in their heart of hearts that it's
Right,
wrong.
right. Yeah. Well, you also talk about that the student had signed a student life agreement.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, are parents notified about that for something they have to sign on?
When the first year they rolled it out, it happened in the middle of the year,
Mhm.
and they weren't. So,
Okay.
and I was my job to make sure the kids signed. I was given a stack of these things and
Oh,
said,
wow.
make sure the kids sign it. And I read it and I said, holy crap, this is crazy. And I remember going to the students and passing it out and saying, well, please take your time and read this. I wanted them to really think about it. I didn't want them to just sign something they didn't read. So take your time, read this, see how you feel about it, ask any questions.
Mhm.
If I can't answer, go to the dean and ask
Right,
questions about
right.
it, because I wanted to make sure the parents did get it and that the kids
Okay.
thought about it. And some of the kids were like, do I have to sign this? I was like, no, you don't.
Okay.
You don't have to sign it.
Okay.
And they kind of thought about it, and maybe one kid took it home for a day, and then they all wound up signing it,
Oh,
because
okay.
they realized that if they didn't sign it, that would be a conversation. And
Wow.
when I say a conversation, I don't mean a conversation. I mean
Right.
a conversation, right? Because that is disturbing the universe.
Wow.
If you were a student and you would have all the reputational costs of all of your, well, why don't you sign it? Like, what you don't believe that we have implicit biases? You don't believe that society's bad?
Wow.
Well, what's wrong with you? So this is the kind of social pressure, the
Right.
coercion, and I felt bad about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these things were accumulating over time that I was participating in, that I was feeling bad about.
Right.
And they added up, and
And by the way, that is pure brainwashing.
yeah, it's completely brainwashing.
Right.
Now, subsequently, the following year, they now have a statement when you apply to the school, or before you sign the enrollment contract, where it says, you'll be expected to sign this. I think I'm not sure, but I think the parents have to sign it.
Okay.
They do at other schools. I know that. I'm not sure if
Okay.
they made the parents sign it, but they were really pushing, actually, to have the parents
So,
go to race
okay.
training as well.
So if
So
a
yeah,
student doesn't sign it, that means he or she cannot be enrolled in school?
that's essentially the case. Like, you have to sign it.
Okay.
And then all the subsequent years, like at the beginning of the year, you pass it out. It's one of the things you sign, just like you would sign the form not to abuse technology, for
Right.
example. Like, that's
Yeah.
one of the forms. The other form
Right.
is like, they just added this form in to
Wow.
fit with the other forms. So it's like, I'm signing stuff.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
but
which
it's committed to a worldview. You're committed to a
right,
worldview.
exactly. And
Yeah.
what year that was started?
That began, I think that was 2018 or 19.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And you also talk about that in your article, that you think most schools, both public and private, are basically been captured by this ideology.
Yeah. I that has borne out.
Mhm.
I've seen that. Yeah.
And also you have talked to a lot of teachers, right? A lot of teachers talk to you about their experience.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. Public school teachers, private school teachers. Private school is very interesting because there's only one other teacher that has gone public against it in private schools, even though I think it's even worse there.
In private school?
in private school.
Oh, wow.
In the, they're called independent
Oh,
schools,
okay. I get,
the elite
right,
schools
right.
or whatever.
I guess
So
that probably has something to do with the region, right? Like
yeah,
your school is, I mean, known for being progressive, and so maybe that's the case.
right. It's a self-selecting bias, I think, is a big
Right.
part of it. But also in public schools, you see
Yeah.
it's pretty self-selecting. Education itself is a pretty biased area
Right.
because of the schools, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, here at kind of Indiana, we start to see those kind of things. I think starting about 2000, 2020, or 2019, that kind of time frame. And I was alarmed by some schools, they are hiring these DEI officers. Even our state in Indiana has a DEI director who was paid the highest, the highest paid uh, state employee, and talk about equity, right? She was highest, even got paid more than the governor. But anyway, so I just,
It's a form of reparations.
right. So I just started looking into, what that means. I mean, why do we need the officer? And that's where I got started my journey, because it turns out that's basically uh, those are political officers back in, like when I was back uh, uh, in China during the Cultural Revolution. Like each schools, they have those political officers, and their job is trying to make sure um, students and the teachers are indoctrinated in this new, you know, uh, what that the new kind of worldview, the new way of thinking.
Yes, and that's in my school, in Grace Church School, we had what I mentioned earlier, the Office of Community Engagement,
Mm.
and they're essentially it's a weird combination because it's an internal bureaucratic mechanism that governs. It's almost like etiquette. It's almost like manners.
Mm.
It's behavior, but
Right.
it's also belief, and it's also your sort of spiritual commitment.
Okay.
And when I remember thinking about the phrase community engagement, Office of Community Engagement, I thought, oh, that's not so bad, right?
Right. Right.
It's the office that engages with the community.
Right.
But what I realized is it's not the Office of Community Engagement. It's the office that tells you how to engage with the community. It's the office that engages with the internally to show how to focus on the community. Like it's a very weird.
Right. 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 What?
It's really just a kind of a double speak.
Right. So it really, when they say community, it doesn't mean the community that we understand, right? I mean, to them, the higher good is for the community. There is a
Right.
community they are trying to build, and they are trying to kind of educate the teacher, I mean the student, to be part of that community. So
Yes. But they will dictate like what the community should be. So
right.
it's really just a mask for power. That's all it
Oh
is.
yeah.
And they have, of course, they're on the side of the angels. They have the perfect vision, and they know when things violate that vision. And they also know that the status quo is bad. So, you can always say that you can always create this, and I'm sure you saw this in education, right? Where you have the thing that's new, you have the system that's old.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you promote the new thing, you don't have any evidence for it. Your evidence you have is weak at best, but you can characterize the old thing in this total straw man way. The traditional ways of doing things are awful and terrible.
Right.
So we need something new, right? So it's like if you drive into a car, into a used car lot with your crappy car, or maybe it's your old car, maybe you just need a new car, and the salesman comes out and says like, wow, you're still driving that beat up jalopy, why don't you try one of these babies? And so like it's marketing, it's just marketing. And but you see this rhetoric, this rhetorical technique over and over again, And, you realize, well, yeah, we put a man on the moon with that stuff, like all
Mhm.
that bad stuff about how
Right,
we use
right.
the teeth.
Yeah.
We had some pretty amazing technological progress in the
Right.
past century.
Yep.
It wasn't all just about, making workers for the factories. Yeah, that was part of it.
Right, right,
But actually, like tests and competence and
right.
excellence and all those things actually created a pretty decent society. I mean, I don't
Right,
know about
right,
society, but like
exactly.
we got a lot smarter
Right.
during that time.
Yeah, and also
Um,
our living standard, improved over the,
yeah, but
yeah,
they have to characterize the evil
right,
society, status quo is evil. So they find a way to do this. And that's part of what the community engagement people
right,
do.
right. Yeah, I mean, they're
Um,
always using this racial kind of dialectic there. They said, okay,
mhm,
well, society, well, people got rich, but only the white, people benefit from it. So the people of color didn't benefit from all that. So therefore, that's bad.
right, but it's wrong. I
Well,
mean, so yeah, we have inequalities. Yeah.
right,
Um, but what they'll do is they'll focus on the gaps,
right,
even though both of them increased, got better. We do have income inequality in this country. That is a problem.
yeah,
But like, the way they characterize things, they never, and to the extent that things are getting better,
hmm,
they'll find a way to subtract that. So
right,
for
right, right,
example, if you have interracial marriage,
right,
completely accepted by 96%
yeah,
of
yeah,
the
yeah,
country, whatever,
yeah, yeah,
tremendous progress.
right,
Well, actually, it's hiding or masking
okay,
something. It's when you adopt, when a white couple adopts a baby of color, well then they're expropriating it. They
uh,
find a way to
right,
spin
right,
it in
right, yeah,
such a way that
yeah. It's
that
all, yeah, it's always like mean, for people, they can spin it. Like when you have racial marriage, is basically the people of color get assimilated into the white culture.
right, right.
Yeah.
It's like genocide. Yeah, no, seriously,
So
like
you can never win. Yeah.
you're taking away the authenticity,
Right.
right? You're
Yeah.
whitewashing people. You believe in a melting pot, which is bad. It should be something else.
Right.
So there's always, that's the critical lens. The critical lens is
Yeah.
ruthless. It only sees, it's like the opposite of rose-colored glasses
Yeah.
is the, you know,
Pretty
but
dark. Yeah.
that's, it's a, yeah. But the great stuff, the great reason behind it, I think, what it does is if you can paint society's bad, if you can create a problem, well, then you can be hired
Right.
to manage it.
Yeah.
So that's the entryism. That's how they get in. That's how
Right.
they
Right.
say, well,
Right. Yeah.
we did this assessment of inclusivity and multiculturalism in your
Right. Right.
school.
Right.
And we found, guess what? We found racism.
Right. Right. So we
Who's
have
going
to
to
come
come in
to
and
fix
save
it.
it? We
Yeah.
are, right? We're the consultants.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what's growing this industry
It is. It
tremendously.
is. Right. Yeah. And uh so like uh your contract was not extended, right? That's what happened.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have, in the independent school world, we have year-to-year contracts. Most of the
Right, right,
schools
right,
have short-term,
right,
and there's no union, there's no collective
right, right, right.
bargaining, and most of them, almost all of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just, I had a certain time limit to agree to it, and I thought about it, and then I was like, I'm not gonna sign.
Okay.
But
So,
I also, it was weird because I'd also recorded my head of school, and he admitted to me that this stuff was crazy,
oh wow.
and then I released the tapes because I wrote the article,
Uh-huh.
came out on Barry Spoice's Substack,
Right.
and then he publicly said that I had lied or misrepresented things.
Oh
And then
wow.
I released a statement saying, no, actually, you agreed with me in private, and here's
Okay.
exactly what you said to me. And then he said, I would never say such things. And I said, here's the tape. And there were like three, I released 3 short recordings that focused on what I told him, what I had said that he said. And he had said, I mean, he definitely said those things on top of other stuff, which I did not publicize.
Right, right, right.
But I was fascinated by that conversation because up until that point, he was a true believer. He never gave any indication that there were excesses
Mm,
to DEI, the way that it was being practiced or running through our school. And I was shocked. I was surprised, but I was also kind of horrified that he knew what was going on
Oh, wow.
and didn't do anything, since he's supposed to protect children.
Right.
And I see him as a tragic figure in many ways, because he was captured by the ideology himself.
Right.
He is a man of enormous privilege, enormous wealth, enormous. I mean, his country club, until until a few decades ago, they wouldn't let blacks or Jews in.
Oh, wow.
He's a very he's from one of the the most wealthy places on Long Island.
Okay.
And one thing I found interesting was that if that bleak vision of our racist culture, which is sold through these consultants, actually resonates, I think, more with people of extreme wealth, because it is true that in an urban setting, if you live in if you own a brownstone,
right.
That until very recently and historically, like, the only black people you would meet were the help.
Right.
And so, in your view, like, well, yes, we are a racist country, because we are so segregated, and so that vision resonates, and it also allows them a way to escape their wealth privilege, because it allows them to say, look, it's not that I'm like the 0.01% of wealthy people. I'm white, and that's where my privilege comes from. And so are we. We are all white. And so, like, it allows them to be democratic in a weird way and say, look, it's not that I'm this person that's so different than you. I'm white, and so are you. And the only difference is that I know it, and you're in denial.
Right.
So it's still, not only does it create a democratic identity where they get to belong, but it also lets them feel better than you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So it maintains the same elitism,
right,
but it's more broadly established.
Wow.
So I find it, I think that it really is what's behind a lot of why you see elites take it up so quickly.
Right.
Elites are like, it's like catnip to elites, the wokeism, the whole thing, because, Peggy McIntosh, who wrote The Invisible Knapsack, scion of one of the wealthiest families in the country. Her privilege that was coming out of her knapsack, maybe like 5% of it was race, and 95% of it was the fact that, she's one of the wealthiest. But now, there's nothing wrong with being wealthy.
Right.
I be wealthy if you can be wealthy. The problem is that it's this woke stuff is now sort of like hiding. It's hiding one thing with another thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, in a way, make them feel morally superior, right?
Yes. You get to, it's a way to recuperate the lost moral authority.
Right.
Which Shelby Steele writes about in White Guilt, which is a fascinating book.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, really enjoying talking with you. And
I'm so glad we met.
Right.
And I read your book. I loved your book. It's a terrific book.
Oh, thank you.
The most recent one, Our Students Are Not Prepared.
Right. That's actually my first book in doing something like that. So I'm actually.
Oh, really? I thought you'd written some other books.
There's another book I'm working on. Is called Spectre is Hunting America. So basically, talk about specter of communism, which is what's going on right now. Yeah, and people needs to basically wake up and to see what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think is that there's a lot of people who came from like escaped from communism and socialism, and the people like us, we see what's going on, but people who ordinary Americans, they probably, that's kind of new to them. Yeah, so I mean the communism are very how to say, shrewd, and they know how to manipulate people. I mean, they have been working on their skills, right? Those kind of skills since the you know, the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, when they started. I mean, all those, you know, psychological manipulation, or those brainwashing. I mean, they are very good at that.
Yeah, and I think they're really, it's the key is empathy. Like they get a hold of your empathic circuits, and they, you know, that, I mean, people need to feel like they're good people,
Right.
to have a good self-concept. And so they displace it, and they say, well, if you want to be a good person, you have to believe X, Y, and Z, and you have to do what we say, and we're going to tell you if you're a good person. And then suddenly you're off balance. You're kind of running down a treadmill, trying to be a good person. And once that's the case, you're done. In my view, like you have to interrupt it, especially with the kids. You know, these are kids. They're doing it too. And so we have to prevent that. We have to get in there, you know, and stop all this. It's crazy.
Right. Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. I hope
very good talking to you.
Yeah, same here. I hope that I'll see you again pretty soon in the future.
Me too. I think we will. We'll definitely run into each other.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
You
Thanks
too.
so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.